Hey guys, and welcome to another Anatomy of Success, where we talk about what went right, what went wrong, and what we could have done better in this key. So today we're going to be talking about a Shadowmoon Burial Grounds 23, and you might be thinking like Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, it's like one of the easiest dungeons in the pool. Why are we talking about this? And you are 100% correct. It has one of the most lenient timers, but there are a couple packs in here that can cause a lot of issues, and in this key specifically, they do. So we've got some things to talk about there, and I feel like that's making it worth talking about. So with that being said, let's go ahead and just jump into the key. We're going to skip over this first pull here. Nothing crazy goes on there, but something interesting goes on immediately afterwards. So let's go ahead and get into that now. Alright, so picking up after that first trash pack, and as you can see, this void spawn is padding over to the left, and that can be a bad sign because there's this other void spawn right there that will teleport back and forth between these two sides, and you typically want to go to the side where it isn't, and which is why you typically want to go to the left, because it will start off over here and teleport back and forth. But here, our group, I think, just didn't want to have to wait or deal with it, so we're just going to go jump straight in to the spawn. And it could have also been the fact that being that delayed or getting to this pack so late, if we had waited for the other void spawn to then pad across to the right side so we could go to the left, by that point the spawn could have teleported over to the left side, and we just basically, that just wastes a whole lot of time. So we're just going to go ahead and do this pull. I wouldn't suggest doing this typically, but it actually goes quite well because the healer can keep up with it. Notice that I did use my astral shift to just kind of help out with the damage taken right away, and then after I get set up with all my flame shocks and stuff, I'm just going to focus on trying to kill this void spawn as quickly as possible, and then just kind of cleave off of that while dodging things on the ground and such. So after the next void pulse, so not that one, but the next one, is where I'm going to use my AG to kind of help out with my healing as well, to just try to get as much healing off of the healer as possible, just to kind of help him out there. But this pull actually goes really well. It's really important in pugs to get a really solid first pull. I can't overstate that in a pug the first pull has so much weight, because if things go wrong really early on in a dungeon, people are much more likely to just completely give up, and that's typically the right call. I mean, if you're just trying to time, but having that first pull go well will really help keep the group together if things go wrong later on in the key, like we'll see in a little bit here. So we're going to go ahead and skip ahead. There's really nothing to talk about on the first boss or this pack either. Nothing really crazy, but I do want to point out, I'm going to skip ahead into the boss, that if you're a range player, you can go ahead and just kind of stay on the side. You can see the tank starting off over here as well, just to bait the first set of spears. But as a range player, you can just kind of stay off to the side as well, just to keep the spears out of the center, to keep that area clean for the melee people, and just make it easier to move around. Also keeping those spears off of the moon circles for the eclipse when that comes out. There's just no real reason to be standing in the middle. So that's just one thing that that might be helpful for you. I mean, it can be helpful if you have an AoE healer that needs you to be more clumped up, like say like a preservation evoker. But just in general, when you're going to be baiting out those spears, it's better to be kind of putting them, like, go ahead and think about where you want to put them, and just don't put them right in the center of this area. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the next trash pack where things get a little bit too real. So we'll go ahead and get into that now. Alright, so picking up with that first set of trash after the first boss, and this is one of the most dangerous trash packs in the entire dungeon, and you're going to see why in just a second. So first off, as an elemental shaman, I just want to point out that Prop Paladin is probably the best tank to pair with us, because a lot of times in this pull, people will want to wait on interrupting this first cast of domination when they're dominating the other souls, but if you aren't going to be interrupting them right away, then you're stuck in this weird position of, are you going to use Earthquake and potentially accidentally interrupt this early, or are you just going to not use Earthquake and basically do no damage in AoE? So having a Prop Paladin will really help us out, because they almost always are going to be using Divine Toll very, very early on. So just something I wanted to point out there for my Elemental Shaman brethren. So as we get into this first pull here, it starts off fairly normally, but something happens right away, and I think everyone in the group sees this. As you can see here, this rending Void Lash looks like it is on the tank. I don't know if you can see this depending on what you're watching this on, but this is being cast on the tank based on what Plater is saying. However, if you go over here to my actual party frames, you can see it's actually hitting the warrior, and I think the entire group is looking at this. As you can see here, I have my mouse over it. I thought about clicking on it to interrupt it, but then saw that it was going on the tank, or at least I thought it was, and chose not to interrupt this. And because of that, this warrior just gets completely wrought all all the way down till he's dead. And as you can see here by my interrupt tracker, the only interrupt was used was the shield, the divine shield. So yeah, I think everyone saw that and just assumed it was going on the tank, but it was actually going on the warrior. So really unfortunate there. So we're already losing one. And then here, the priest just immediately gets one shot. And I've watched this several times over, and I cannot figure out exactly why he's dying, but my guess is somehow, because these souls have like some weird programming, right here, you'll see these guys move forward. And as you can see here, the paladin's right here, and the priest is right here, but these souls move towards the priest. And it looks like this one right here, because this one's looking at the paladin, but I can't really see where this one's looking, but is making this, he's like kind of moving towards the priest, and then the priest just dies. So I'm still not 100% sure what happens there. I don't think the paladin lost aggro, especially this late into the pull, but as you can see, we're in a very, very rough position now, because now we are down 2 DPS and we're only at like 84% on this entire pack. Really, really rough. So what does this mean? We have to CC and use our interrupts basically on cooldown, and in a pug situation, we have to just hope that we're not overlapping our interrupts. So the good news is we do have a prop paladin. Earthquake will interrupt some of these on their own, and fortunately I had not used my stun yet, so I had just put my stun down here. I have 2 dominations. Fortunately, they're both aimed at me, so they can't both go off, but also my stun totem is going to go off just in time to interrupt that. And I almost always use Cudgel nowadays, especially if my group doesn't have a lot of AoE stuns, or they're not bringing that many, or I just don't trust them to put them down. I bring Cudgel so I can get this initial stun and then a second stun right away. Really helpful for situations exactly like this one. So that's what I use there. So I got 2 different stuns out here, and now I'm basically just looking to be kicking. So I find one. One of them was on me. I used that one on me. Fortunately, this time it's right. This Void Lash is going off on the tank, so he can take that one a little bit, but he does stun it. And now I'm just going to be looking and trying to interrupt anything I can if I have a kick up for it. You can just barely see down here at the bottom. I was pressing on my mouse. I was trying to press my Thunderstorm right as these went off. So unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to use my Thunderstorm to break that. The Paladin will get me out of it by using Blinding Light, but unfortunately that puts me into CC. And now we're just trying to stay alive the best we can, interrupt any of these dominations we can. We did battle res the Warrior, so that will help out tremendously, at least in trying to kill these guys. But the big thing is just stopping these casts any ways you can. As you saw, the Druid used his Roar there. I'm going to use my interrupt on that Void Lash. And it's just like, as you can see, there's just so much going on in this pull because we lost so much damage right at the beginning of it. But fortunately, somehow we were able to recover and somehow managed to kill this pack. And what it really comes down to is using that CC, looking to get those kicks off, and not losing your cool too much. A lot of times in these pulls, when things start going crazy, even I lose my my focus. But fortunately right there, I think the biggest part being the fact that we had a Paladin, but fortunately right there, we were managing to kick and interrupt a lot of those casts, which is basically where all of that damage is really coming from, is from those casts. So interrupting that Void Lash, stopping the domination from going out. A very, very, very hectic pull to kind of go over and talk about every little bit. So I know I missed some things that were probably interesting there, but somehow we were able to recover. And even with that low amount of damage, we're still able to get through it. So sometimes, like, when things start going crazy, just hunker down, pay attention to what you can control, get your stuns out, make sure that you're using your interrupts, and things might recover. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and move on a little bit. Just thought that pull right there was kind of the biggest thing that I wanted to point out, but let's go ahead and keep moving on and look at some of the other things and what we could do better, as well as what we did right as well. So we'll continue on from here. All right, so picking up at the end of the second boss, I mainly just want to show this in case you're unaware of it, but this exhumed spirit that spawns right here will always get pulled when you pull this next pack, but what you can do is, as the second boss is dying, you can just come over here and step on it, and then as the boss dies, it will just despawn the spirit, so you just don't have to deal with it. Just a little bit of a time save. So with this pack, the main thing that I wanted to show is I just wanted to call myself out here. The Paladin I didn't really give the Paladin enough time to get aggro before I started using my Stormkeeper here, and I get aggro on these souls. Now, yes, the souls, because they're still being dominated, can be controlled to go hit someone, but this is really just my fault for just popping off too quickly. But sometimes when I'm like setting up my damage, I forget to pay attention to what's directly in front of me. When any class that has like a lot of setup before you can actually start doing damage, I feel like sometimes you get so focused on pressing your buttons that you forget that's what's directly in front of you. And as you can see here, this one just comes over, punches me in the face, and I could have saved this with just a simple press of Thunderstorm and just knock them away, maybe put down a stun totem. But I'm so focused on just trying to get my damage out that I just stand here and get punched in the face a second time, which obviously is going to destroy my damage. So I mainly wanted to show that just to make sure that you're actually aware of what's happening around you, and just kind of to call myself out here, give myself a little finger wag, and just remind myself, like, pay attention to what's happening directly in front of you. Make sure you're paying attention to mechanics first before you start worrying about setting up your damage and whatnot, because you're not going to be able to do any damage if you die. So with that being said, everything else goes fine in this pool. Yeah, the explosive got off, but everything else is fine here. But the big thing is, like, if you die, that's going to really wreck your damage. So make sure you're at least paying to the mechanics that are directly in front of your face. So with that being said, we'll just go ahead and move on. I mainly just want to call myself out. And we'll just go ahead and pick up with after the third boss, because nothing really crazy or interesting happens all the way through that. The third boss is like such a snooze fest. So we'll go ahead and pick up with the trash right after that boss and go from there. All right, so moving into that pack right after the third boss, as you can see, the Paladin is calling out which one he's going to be focusing for the interrupt, which is always useful anytime there's a whole lot of interrupts that need to be focused on. Fortunately, he's a Paladin, so that'll make it a lot easier. Another thing I want to point out is that I go into this without my Primordial Wave or my Liquid Magma Totem, so I had used it at the end of the fight for the boss. Anytime that you're on a fortified week and you know you have a dangerous pack coming up and you can try to line up your cooldowns, you should. This is just a bad job by me for managing my cooldowns on the previous boss. So unfortunately, I just don't have a whole lot of damage going into this. And it doesn't help here in a second that when I put out my Liquid Magma Totem, you'll see, I'll do it here in just a second, that for some reason, even though I put it right in the middle of all of them, it does not spread to one of the bats. And so I'm getting my fourth Flame Shock out right at the end of this pack. So right at the 50% mark is when I finally get my fourth Flame Shock out. Really super unfortunate. It completely destroys my damage on this pack. But just wanted to also point out that, man, Arms Warrior can do a lot of damage on 4 targets. I assume he had most of his cooldowns up in order to be able to do that much damage. But getting over 300,000 on 4 targets is something that I find like kind of insane. I realize that after the buffs, Arms Warrior has done a much better job in Mythic Plus, but this is like the first dungeon I had done with one since those buffs, because there's still just a ton of Fury Warriors out there, but apparently Arms Warrior is doing quite well. And I know that people like Crit Cake have been using Arms Warrior in Mythic Plus, but it's the first time I've really seen it up close. So yeah, just something I thought was interesting to point out. One thing I'll point out on this right here, the Shadow Priest does this correctly, and I don't. I was a little asleep at the wheel, but these void pulses, in case you weren't aware, can be line of sight right here. So as you can see here, I'm going to get hit by it, but the priest does not. So he's standing where he should be. I'm trying to make sure I still get some damage out, and I'm just kind of late to moving. Again, just kind of sleep at the wheel. Some things that I could do better, I could be right here, so all I have to do is just a slight shift over to the left, and then I can line of sight it like the priest is doing right here. Fortunately, it doesn't really matter. This healer has done a fantastic job of just brute forcing all the healing at this point. So with that being said, there's one last thing I want to talk about on the boss, so we'll go ahead and move on and do that now. All right, so one thing I wanted to point out, in case you weren't aware, because this is something I was only made aware of recently, are these symbols on the ground right in the middle of the arena. There are 2 symbols that look different. They're slightly bigger and have a star in the center of them right there. And there's one on either side, and that is where the waves will always spawn from. So you always know it'll either be coming from this side over here or this side over here. And with that knowledge, what you can do is, when the omens are coming out, which are these pillars here, you can bait them in a position where you will not have to worry about them being in the way at all. So you can kind of see it over here. There's going to be one over here and one over here. So the waves are either coming from this side or this side, which means that if I'm baiting over here, we can always kill one of the bone guys on that far side over here. And we know that these omen circles are not going to be an issue for us at all. Unfortunately, this one gets baited kind of not where I really wanted it to be. It's not a huge deal, but on higher difficulties, it can be a little bit more troublesome, because now you can see that because it was baited over here, it kind of makes it difficult to kind of get DPS out on these bones without getting hit by the omen. So just something to be aware of is that you always know that it's coming from either one of these sides, and you can see that by what's on the ground. So if you are a ranged person and you're trying to bait those omens, try to get either to one side or the other. Don't bait them across like this. Another thing for Elemental Shaman specifically, always save your Primordial Wave, especially if you're using Splintered Elements, for this phase here, so that you can get a big amount of haste. It's not padding because you're getting a huge amount of haste. I know it might look like it to other classes, but by getting more Flame Shocks out, you'll get more haste, which will help with that single target, as well as generating a lot more Maelstrom. So I don't try to force it too much. I try to get at least 4, something like that. Sometimes you can get 5, just depends on how quickly you can get Flame Shocks out, what cooldowns you have available to you. You can, if you're really precise with it, you can put your Liquid Magma Totem on the one to the far side and the one right next to it. Let's see if I can find a good... yeah, if on this side here, if you put your Liquid Magma Totem right here, you can get both of them if you're super precise, if you're trying to squeeze one more out, and then that makes it a lot easier to get to 5. But sometimes I miss with that, or I just don't have it up. So again, 4 is a good safe number that you can get fairly reliably, though if you can get more, then I'd highly suggest doing that too. Right here is where I make a huge mental mistake, and it's all because of Thundering. And as you might be aware, you don't want to be touching these walls here, and you'll see that I overcorrect because of this swirl here. There's no reason to do that, because this is not going to kill you if it hits you. It just stuns you momentarily and just does a tiny bit amount of damage. But touching the wall will do a lot more damage. So you can see I just barely graze it as I try to run around this swirly, which I wouldn't have gotten hit by anyway. And at a 23, that's going to kill you every time. And the other problem here is dying on this boss can be really, really bad, because now that there's no one baiting, those Omens of Death, when they spawn, will do a ton of damage if you're anywhere close to them. And my Reincarnate, as I Reincarnate goes out, the Omen of Death was right on top of melee, and being this close to it is going to cause me to instantly die. And this is how I see a lot of groups get into trouble here. That was kind of my fault. I should have waited a second before taking the Reincarnate. Fortunately, I was able to get a res as well, but that could have gone really, really badly really quickly. Fortunately, we were able to recover that and then finish out the boss with no real issues as well. Again, making sure, even though I just got rezzed, making sure that I'm baiting these omens off to the side here and not in the middle of the platform. So just keep those things in mind. Make sure you're really paying attention to where you're facing and making sure that you're not grazing the walls. Again, I tried to go for that Liquid Magma Totem. You can get it, I just wasn't precise enough. But that's pretty much it. That's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about. That's pretty much everything that I could have done wrong. Basically, getting hit by the souls, as well as touching the side of the walls here, which is really just a really bad, really stupid mental mistake. I thought I was clear, but obviously I was not. So that's pretty much it. That's everything I wanted to show for this dungeon. It's a very simple dungeon, and I think we all know that it's a simple dungeon, but there are things that can go wrong that will make this dungeon harder than it needs to be. Like, just on this boss alone, like I said, with the baits, always being careful about where you are. As you can see, we're setting that up much better that time. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this dungeon. Hopefully this was helpful. Again, I know it wasn't that difficult of a dungeon, but there are some things in here that I do see go wrong in Pugs all the time. Hopefully this is helpful for you. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I stream at Twitch at twitch.tv/ridmark, so come give me a follow there if you want. And other than that, guys, that's pretty much it for today, and I will see you guys in the next video.